In West Berkshire, as in the rest of the country, there's a crisis growing in the funding of social care. A crisis that won't be solved by the imposition of a dementia tax. Since 2001, the number of elderly people living in this district has increased by 23%, and over the next decade it's projected to increase by another 34%. This will mean another 8,000 pensioners living in our district, many of whom will need some form of care. Funding to provide dignity and help in old age is part of a civilised society, but panicky and ill-thought-out schemes will make matters worse. Nobody should have to face the eventual sale of a family home to pay for the bad luck of being old and ill. Labour will increase funding by £3 billion in the first year and build a consensus for a national care service. To end the lottery that may see many people in West Berks have to pay for their care with their homes. And we will stick by that pledge. The people in the area deserve a proper answer to the biggest issue facing West Berkshire, not a dementia tax and not spin. Theresa May has shown that her strong and stable mantra is nothing but hot air. She's already made so many U-turns that she must feel dizzy, weak and wobbly. We accept the result of the referendum, but we must negotiate to be partners and not enemies. A hard Brexit will result in disaster. A good Brexit will mean access to the single market as trading partners to protect jobs, consumer regulations, environmental standards and the economy. We will negotiate access to EU markets for our farmers. We will negotiate a transitional arrangement to avoid a cliff edge for the British economy and to avoid a hard customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Leaving the EU with no deal would be the worst possible deal for Britain, its security and policing. We will continue to work with the EU and other European nations on issues such as climate change, refugee crises and counter-terrorism. There's no need to rerun the referendum, as the Lib Dems want. In fact, it's virtually the only thing they want, apart from a seat at the Tory table, so they can break more promises and fail our country again. And of course, a good deal for Britain would need to be backed by Parliament, because we're a parliamentary democracy after all. The workers in frontline services are the unsung heroes of West Berkshire and our country. They work in the NHS, in social care, with disabled children and our elderly. They do the day in, day out of supporting and helping the most vulnerable people in our society. Yet they are made to pay for their dedication and skill by being forced to take pay cuts each year, as inflation rises above 2% and their pay is capped at 1% rises each year. The Conservatives are using them to subsidise the services that we all use. The NHS is short of nurses and doctors, while social care workers are leaving because they can't afford to feed their families. Labour will invest in our health and social care staff, scrap the NHS pay cap and put decisions back into the hands of an independent pay review body and give our NHS workers the pay they deserve. There will be £30 billion worth of extra funding over the next Parliament, paid for by increasing tax on the top 5% of earners, increasing tax on private medical insurance, and slashing in half the fees we pay to management consultants. That's the fair way to support frontline services. The NHS is one of Great Britain's finest achievements, but it's being bled to death by continued budget cuts. Hospitals are being closed, waiting lists are growing, and targets are being abandoned because they simply can't be met. Patients are being left in trolleys and corridors, and ambulances stack up outside A&E units because there are no beds available. This must stop. We can save our NHS, and we must. Labour will add £30 billion of extra funding over the next Parliament to the NHS by increasing income tax on the top 5% of earners, by increasing tax on private medical insurance, and by slashing in half the fees we pay to management consultants. We will increase capital funding so that people are treated in modern buildings with modern equipment. There will be a new Office for Budgetary Responsibility for Health to make sure that money is spent wisely and well. And a sugar tax on soft drinks will bring long-term savings in obesity. And the cherry-picking of services by the private sector has to stop. We will put patients before profit. The NHS was bludgeoned under previous Tory administrations and rescued by Labour in the 90s. But it's in trouble again. The NHS is one of the great glories of Great Britain, We should fund it properly instead of cuts, sell-offs and closures. Well, first I'd like to applaud my opponent Richard Benyon, the Conservative candidate, for his support of charities such as Loose Ends and Two Saints, which provide help for the homeless in Newbury. It's good that one of the richest MPs finds time to help those who are most vulnerable. And he, like me, will no doubt be disappointed by the Conservative manifesto, which only dedicated one tiny paragraph to the issue of homelessness. But soup kitchens and charities are not the answer to a national crisis, nor do they stop the rise in homeless people in West Berkshire. This is a national problem which requires a national government solution. There is a housing crisis. The number of houses built in this country is at its lowest peacetime rate since the 1920s, and rough sleeping has grown every year. Labour has a national plan to end rough sleeping within the next Parliament. We'll build 4,000 homes for people with a history of rough sleeping. We'll build thousands more council homes. Reversing the abolition of housing benefit for young people will help keep them off the streets. And we'll reverse the bedroom tax that forces vulnerable people out of their homes if they can't find cheaper accommodation. I'm sure that Richard will agree with me that West Berkshire would be a better place if the charities that he supports were no longer needed. Conservatives are promising a free breakfast rather than lunch, so it's tempting to say that under Theresa May, all school meals will be toast. But the serious point here is that axing free school lunches is really a question of how education should be funded. The abolition of lunch is a panic response to the blowback the Tories have been getting on the doorstep from voters about their new funding formula, which would have meant real terms cuts, huge ones, to the budget of virtually every school in our area. West Berkshire primary heads even had to write to parents, telling them that they couldn't guarantee the cuts wouldn't affect frontline teaching. So weak and wobbly May rushed through new plans that took children's lunch money away from them. Even so, the $1 billion that the Conservatives reckon they can raise from lunch money is inadequate. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says this will still mean 2 to 3% real terms cuts in per pupil spending. Labour's National Education Service will ensure that children have the funding they need, $4.8 billion a year by the end of the next Parliament, so there's no need to do without lunch. Support the renewal of the Trident nuclear deterrent. Labour supports the renewal of the Trident nuclear deterrent. Our manifesto declares support for our nuclear deterrent. And unlike some other parties, we don't make U-turns on our manifesto before the ink is even dry. But nobody, not even North Korea, thinks nuclear missiles are a sensible weapon to use. It's called a deterrent for a reason, and having to use it would be a failure of catastrophic proportions. And as a nuclear power, we have responsibility to fulfil our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Labour will lead multilateral efforts with international partners and the UN to create a nuclear-free world. But there are other threats in our world that can't be wished away by political grandstanding and innuendo. Conservative spending cuts have put our world security at risk, shrinking the army to its lowest size since the Napoleonic Wars. Ships, including the Ark Royal, have been scrapped, and design faults have bedevilled our Type 45 destroyers. Our armed forces have been hit by rent rises, pay restraint, and changes to tax and benefits, putting real pressure on service personnel and their families. My grandfather was a paratrooper, and the men and women that followed him into the armed services should be rewarded properly for what they do. And, like most people, we believe that ethical diplomacy and international law is the best way to avoid these weapons ever having to be used. No. For the same reason that I don't support a second referendum. It's been voted on, it's settled law, and nobody believes that a second go would produce a different result. It's an archaic institution that has been abandoned along with bear baiting. The rural economy of West Berks that surrounds the high-tech corridor of the M4 is managing just fine without it. The old Berks hunt still meets, the horsemen and women still enjoy their hacks in the countryside, and the racing economy of Lambourne and Newbury attracts owners and punters alike. It is not an expression of individual freedom to chase a wild animal with hounds, any more than it is to set dogs or cocks fighting. It is, the country as a whole has recognised, cruel as an act and next to useless as pest control. Like grammar schools, its reintroduction by Theresa May owes more to nostalgia than to concern for personal liberty. No. Grammar schools are divisive and were abandoned except in a few areas because they were failing society and failing children. In Kent, for example, which has 33 grammar schools, they are making it harder for the poorest pupils to get ahead. At 2 of them, over 40% went to a prep school. The richer your parents are, the better you do at grammar school. Here's the key. 3 out of 4 kids will be marked as failures, age 11. If you're ill on the day of an exam, you've got bad hay fever, or your grand's just died, or you just have a bad day, you'll be marked as a failure. Even Michael Gove said that grammars aren't doing enough to reach out to poor families. In the selective local authorities, pupils in the poorest 40% of families do worse than average, and those on free school meals do especially badly. They suck up resources and will inevitably mean less money for secondary moderns that will take the 11 plus failures, i.e. just about most kids in England and Wales. The idea that grammar schools led to a meritocratic surge in the 50s and 60s is a myth. It was a rise in white-collar jobs that enabled people to rise up the social scale. Grammar schools are an expensive distraction from the real problem: underfunding of education. I want an education system that allows all children to fulfil their potential, not just a privileged few. I'm ambitious for every child. No, but we will reverse a giveaway, which would mean that people with a house worth £1 million won't pay inheritance tax on it. We will return this new threshold to its present reasonable £650,000. The average price of a house in Newbury is £370,000, so most people won't even be affected. There is nothing wrong with leaving the fruits of your labour to your children, but that depends on having something to pass on in the first place. The Conservatives are taking pensioners for granted. Their manifesto contains a triple whammy: scrapping the triple lock on pensions, 19,000 pensioners in Newbury constituency will lose their winter fuel payments, and people nearing pension age will see their retirement deferred into the distance. And then there's the dementia tax. Their manifesto is clear. Your family home will be included in your assets when it comes to paying for your care in old age, until only £100,000 is left. And now there's just panic, fudge, confusion and misdirection. Voting Conservative may put your home and your children's inheritance at risk. This isn't scaremongering, it's just scary. Labour will keep the triple lock on pensions, the winter fuel allowance, and won't raise your pension age. That's in the manifesto, and when we say it, we mean it.